everyone. Welcome back to the Biblical Monologue podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Flanagan, and the Biblical Monologue is a place where you hear stories from moms who've encountered God through motherhood. Today, I have with me Whitney Akin. Did I say that right?
You sure did. Good job.
Welcome, Whitney.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. Happy to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Me
So,
too.
um, Whitney is the author of the book Overlooked, Finding Your Worth When You Feel All Alone. Her heart is to see and celebrate the purpose and potential of the overlooked and invite them to live seen by the God who loves them. Whitney's writing has been featured in Encourage, Her View from Home, Proverbs 31 Ministries, and more. You can find more of her writing and speaking at her website and connect with her on Instagram and Facebook. Whitney lives outside Atlanta, Georgia with her husband Eli and their three crazy, beautiful kids. And I will post the all of those links in the description box. So after you listen today, you can go and check out Whitney's everything from Whitney. Here is her book. I'm sure this is probably backwards, but Overlooked. I'm reading it right now, and it is so good.
Thank you. That's so sweet of you.
That's just such a relatable topic. I know we were talking before we got started that, everyone has felt overlooked in some way in their life, right?
Yeah, and for so many different reasons. We were saying before this episode, just the stories that have come in from women on ways that I didn't expect that they felt overlooked has been really eye-opening for me, and just shows that we all are struggling with similar things, but in different ways, which is interesting and amazing how God meets us there.
It sure is. And it's like, I was just thinking as you were talking, like God just kind of opened the door for all of those things through you taking that first step and being bold enough to write about it. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty incredible book. If you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend it. I'm like, as I'm reading, I'm like blown away. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I can
Oh,
relate
that's so
here.
sweet. Oh, that's
So,
awesome.
so Whitney is going to share with us today about how God has met her in motherhood, but it started with infertility. So I will just let you have the floor.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like my motherhood journey started before I had children, really, because of this season of infertility that my husband and I walked through. So we got married very young. We were high school sweethearts and married right out of college. And so by the time I was 20 when I got married, which seems so young now, but by the time I was in my mid 20s, I was, thinking about children and wanting to have a baby. And I just thought this would be something that I could totally plan out. I had, the month I would like to have a baby, the reasons why, the money I'd like to have saved up, just everything would be planned perfectly. And I had no history of infertility in my family. It wasn't a subject I even thought about. It just wasn't on my mind. And so after several months of trying, I thought something's not right. And heading on into a year of trying, I started to go to some doctors and found out that I did have infertility, and it was me. That struggle. If you've ever been through infertility, is like,
Yes.
if it's your husband or if it's you, and it's silly, but it does kind of have this very emotional effect on you to know, okay, it's my fault that we're struggling with this. And so I started to go through this season of everything starting to crumble around me. So my testimony is that I was saved when I was 5 years old, which is so young, but in a very simple and um, I don't know, childlike way. My parents explained to me who God was and the story of salvation. And I was like, I need to know this God. And my parents prayed with me. And then as a high schooler, I really began to seek the Lord. And I just sort of have that story of, and I praise God for it. It's not a very exciting testimony, although I think every salvation is exciting. But
Yeah.
the story of just sort of growing up in a Christian home, going to church, seeking the Lord. And I think in a lot of ways, by the time I was in my mid 20s, for me, my faith was just kind of like everything was black and white, like it was just what I had grown up learning. And
Mhm.
then in infertility, it was like all of a sudden all of that was crumbling, and I was having to really um, come to terms with what I really believed about God, and it was very difficult. So I was I am an introvert, and I don't really love unwanted attention. And so when we went through infertility, I wanted to not tell anyone that we were going through it because I didn't want any pity. I didn't want any questions from people at church. And so my husband and I kept it a secret. Just the two of us knew it. And we didn't even tell our families who we were very close to for a while. If I could go back, I think I'd do that differently because I would have loved to have had the prayers of people and that community. But I was just in a point in life where I felt like I wanted to try to do this alone for a while. And because of that, um, I mean, I think that I have a wonderful marriage, but it's like when you're going through a season of suffering, your words just kind of dry up. There's anything, that they can say to change anything or do to make anything better. And so it was just such a lonely and difficult season. And I think even when people around you know you're going through infertility, it's still a lonely and difficult
Yes.
season. And so it came a couple years into it, it was just kind of like me and God. I felt like, I felt like my husband and I didn't even have anything else to talk about regarding it because we were just repeating the same things over and over. And even in my
Mhm.
prayers to God, I prayed Hannah's prayer, which is, Lord, I'm asking you for a child, grant of me what I've asked of you. And I just would like pray it over and over and over incessantly, to the point where I felt like I couldn't even pray anymore. All I could do was just repeat those words. And I was angry and upset and really, I just really couldn't understand why I was going through that. And this is the place where God began to deal with my heart. And so, first of all, I felt this encounter with God. So, having been a Christian since a child, in my mid 20s, I felt like I knew God more intimately in that season than I ever had before. And I don't even really know how to explain it, but I could sense his presence comforting me in a way that nobody else could. And it was very powerful and very personal. And I could sense that God was just with me and that he saw me and that maybe he wasn't fixing the problem that I was in, but his presence was very near to me. And I believe during that time, his Holy Spirit was ministering to me and comforting me because he is the comforter and really walking me through this like joy of his presence. And so the thing that I had to grapple with during that time was this sort of question that came upon my heart that I didn't like at all, and but I couldn't get it out of my head. And so sometimes I think God lays those things in our hearts, like, where did that thought come from?
Yeah.
And the question was, what if I don't? And so my prayer is, Lord, give me this child I'm asking of you. But the thing I kept hearing in my head was, what if I don't? As if God was asking me that question. And I thought, that is the worst thing I could think. Why would I think that? I don't want to hear that. That sounds terrible.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't, I couldn't get away from that thought. And I began to wrestle with, okay, well, what would life look like if I really don't ever have children? Just simple things like I never have a chance to pick out a Halloween costume. Those are things I think about, or celebrate Christmas morning with children, or throw a birthday party, or all these things I had just thought would be part of my life. Like I was really in the middle of grappling with accepting what it would look like if none of those things were part of my everyday life. Even school calendars and just sort of basing your life around this idea of children is what I had always thought that I would have. And so and then I became really convicted as I was in Psalm 51, restore to me the joy of my salvation. And I thought, I'm a
Mm.
Christian. So, like, Jesus dying for me and saving me out of my sin, but that should be enough to bring me joy. But here I am in this place where it feels like if I don't have a child, I'll never find fulfillment in this life. And that was a very honest, real place that I was in. And I started to pray, instead of Hannah's prayer, I started to pray David's prayer, which was restore to me the joy of my salvation. So, God, if you don't give me children, make it enough here and now in this place where I can live my life and not always be in sorrow. And it's like easy to tell this story in hindsight as if it was this very, neat thing that happened very quickly, but it was a very messy thing that happened over a very long period of time, in my heart. But God began to just kind of show me, that his presence was the fulfillment that I needed. So, that there was enough comfort in him, that there was enough to look forward to in living in him, that there was enough satisfaction in him, and that I didn't have to go looking for that in something else. And I think that a very convicting and difficult thing that God showed me in my own heart was that I really wanted the gift more than the giver. So I really wanted the child more than I wanted to know God. And so he stripped me of that, which if anyone listening has ever gone through infertility or is going through infertility, I don't even know how to describe how deeply hard, that is for a mother and a mother longing for a child. I don't know what to compare that pain to, when you're longing for a child. And and so this idea that God was jealous for my heart, like he talks about in his word, he's jealous for his people, um, that I had to turn my affection more toward him than toward this baby that I longed for. And so over the course of about 3 years, God really laid that question on my heart. What if I don't? And I remember this time when I just, in my heart, surrendered to him. Like, I really believed I wasn't going to have children. And I just said, I just know, God, if you don't, you're still a good God. And I don't know how much it's going to hurt. I don't know for how long, but I believe after all of this that we've walked through together, you're still good. And God graciously, not because of me or coming to that conclusion, just because of his sovereignty and his will, he did graciously give me a daughter. And then he gave me two more children after that without ever struggling through infertility, which is so wild to me. And I think that as I look back over that season, of course, my daughter is as a miracle and a blessing and a gift. But I think that I walked away with two miracles, and that is that he gave me my daughter, but he totally transformed my heart during that time. And I walked out of that season a very different person. And it was really the trajectory that sort of began the path of where I am today, of, seeking to live my life for this God that I really got to know during this really difficult season of suffering.
And you ever think about how different being a mother would have been for you had you not gone through that season?
Yeah.
I know I've been through infertility as well, and you're right. There are no words to describe that desire, that longing. It's like you can't compare it to anything. It's almost like grief, but not, but hope, but it's such a weird place to be, and it's the most random things that can just trigger you when you're going through that. And so
Yes.
much of what you said I can relate to from my own experience, but I love that how you continually landed on the perfect peace that the Holy Spirit was giving you. And it's like that's the peace that passes all understanding. And I'm sure at the time you probably didn't understand it at all.
Mhm.
But that's it. And that's where it comes, I think, is when we go through those really hard things like you were talking about with all of the questions and the
Mhm.
things that would bother you or that you would think about when you were going through that season. So
Yeah.
that is really a very beautiful story. Thank you for sharing.
Mm,
It's
absolutely.
beautiful and messy, right?
Right. All stories are, right? Quite
Yeah.
a bit messy. Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. But it's like I know I look back and I think, well, I don't know what kind of mom I would have been had I not gone through that. And I
I
don't
think
know.
that for me, I had a lot of, um, expectations of what kind of mom I would be and how my children would be and what they would wear, what they would look like, and how their nursery would look, and all the things I would buy, and all the things
Yeah.
I'd never do, and all the things I would do. And honestly, just, all of that just crashed and died during infertility. And it was just like, God, I know I'm just totally humble before you. I don't know what it's going to look like. Make it look like what you want it to look like. And I think that sort of having those, making motherhood my identity was probably where I was before.
Mhm.
And then after infertility, it was just like, I'm just so grateful I have an opportunity to even do this. And it really is very eye opening.
Did anyone around you notice the change in you after you went through that season? Like, did your husband or your family?
I think, I think maybe because after before infertility, I would say that, and I write about this in the book, that I really struggle with hiding myself away from people. And so, um, feeling overlooked, which is what the book's about, has been sort of a theme in my life. And it was a theme in infertility as well, but sort of for different reasons. So as a kid, I was shy. And then growing up, I just always kind of felt like I was, always picked last or not the best, just always
Yeah.
overlooked. And then in infertility, I felt overlooked for my suffering, mainly because people didn't know I was going through it, which was my own fault. But,
Yeah.
um,
We do
but
that
I
to ourselves, you know.
do that to ourselves. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, so I really learned to hide myself away. So kind of sort of describe it like as a kid, I learned to just sit down and be quiet. And if I could do that, I wouldn't get hurt, or I could maybe not get hurt. And then as I went through infertility, God kind of began afterwards, after I had my daughter and sort of came out of that season and was reflecting on what God had taught me. I began to see all the ways that I was hiding myself, and hiding my heart from other people also meant that I was really hiding my heart away from the Lord,
Mm.
from Him being able to use me in other people's lives, because I wasn't willing to open myself up at all. And after infertility, my husband at that time was in a ministry, and it was this family ministry where he would go around this family and sing at different churches. And so we would go to these churches, and it would be like, he had a couple of brothers and they had children, so it was like this big family up on stage with all these kids, looking quite wonderful and perfect. And here I was after infertility thinking, I know there's a woman out there who has been through what I've been through, or who is going through it right now, and I just cannot walk out of this church and let her feel like she just saw the perfect family and go home crying because her life doesn't look that way. And so, um, God began to call me to, share my story. And so I asked my husband, they would lead worship. And I said, could I just go up after one of your songs and just share my story of infertility? And they were all very shocked, because this is something I never do before. And I began to do that everywhere we went. And so, yeah, I think that change was one of the very obvious changes in my life. And just this idea that God really began to call me to open my heart up to other people. And I think that started through infertility, because I opened my heart up to Him in a way that was willing to trust Him with my heart and come out of that place of hiding and protecting myself from other people.
That's pretty incredible that you um, were willing to just, hey, I'm going to share this story. And did you find people that could relate or had gone through it, or that they did, were you able to pray for people and
Hmm. Yeah,
minister?
everywhere I got up and shared the story. And so I struggled, and even now, like even sharing it on this podcast, sometimes there's a struggle, because I did, I guess, receive that happy ending. Like I was able to have children,
Mhm.
and that's not everybody's story. And so sometimes it's hard to tell it in hindsight, because of course we can't guarantee that that will be everybody's story, although I wish it were.
I do
And
too.
so I struggle with sharing it. And I remember the first time I got up to share it, a woman came up to me and said that she was an older woman, but when she was younger, she had had twins who were both stillborn, and she was crying. And I remember just saying, I'm so sorry. That's so much worse than what I've been through. I just can't imagine. And she told me, and I'll never forget it. She just looked me in the eyes and said, it doesn't matter if it's better or worse. It just mattered that you were willing to share about it. And that really encouraged me to keep going. But every time I got up at a church to share, I could see like the specific women in the congregation who I knew were struggling with it, because they would always begin to cry, and someone next to them would begin to hold them in it. Um, and I knew there would be probably three or four in every congregation, and people just didn't talk about it, and still don't often talk about it in a
Right.
way that lets people feel seen. And that's what I write about in Overlooked, and that's what I wanted, through my story of infertility, is just for people to remember that they are seen in their suffering, and God sees them, and that makes a big difference.
It does. It really does. I think, you feel they probably felt like, "Oh no, God called me out." Like this
Yeah.
woman just called me out in front of everyone. But what an incredible ministry for you and your husband as well. Did that bring like strength to your marriage after you had been through such a hard time? I know you said that there's just nothing else to talk about anymore when you were going through that. I remember, I could totally relate to that as you were talking about it because it was the same for us. It was like, you know, he was like, well, sorry.
Yeah. Mhm.
Like he just, their emotions are different than ours with that kind of thing. Did you find that
That's
after you were willing to share your story and he, was a part of that, did that help and kind of bring you closer together as a couple?
Yeah, yeah, I think all in all, going through that season, um, drew us together, especially as we came out of that season. I think it allowed us to um, appreciate what God had given us a, a whole lot more than we would have if we hadn't walked through that season, and to have a heart for other people who were dealing with it. But I think my husband struggled and grieved through it as well. But I do think there's something singular about this for women that is unique to the mother's longing. And I don't know what or why that is, but it's not that men don't struggle with it. I just think there's something unique to the women going through it. And so to connect with other women on that was a special thing to get to do. And I really don't share my story of infertility all that much anymore. My daughter's 10. And so this was now coming out of that was 10 years ago now, which seems
Yes. It's crazy,
but
isn't it?
the farther I get away from it, it's almost like the more I realize how transformative it was for everywhere that I am in my life today. Not really even just with my children, but spiritually and in ministry, how that season was so transformative. And I hope that's an encouragement to someone listening who may be going through that regardless of the outcome, children or no children or adoption or whatever it looks like, that season isn't wasted. And I've seen that so over and over again. God has been showing that to me over the last 10 years.
Yes, there's nothing that's wasted, and
Mhm.
especially when he draws us to him the way that he did with you and your situation. It's never wasted, and he uses that to bring you more strength for the days ahead and whatever else may come. That is such a beautiful story. And I love how the Bible doesn't shy away from reality, and we have so much in the Bible. And the Bible talks about how women were barren, and this Hannah's story is just it's so encouraging because Hannah went to the right
Mhm.
place with her deep
Yeah.
anguish. And there, yeah, it's so it's such a place that we can relate to.
Mhm.
And like you were talking about praying her prayer, you know, that the Lord would give you a child.
Yeah.
So it's just we have so many um, reasons to turn to the Lord in
That's
His
right.
Word and in our
Mhm.
hearts. And it's like you said, it is hard to let that go because what would it look like if this didn't happen for me? It's good that you mentioned that because yeah, I can relate. I know we ended up being able to have a child after 3 years, but I know a lot of people it doesn't happen that way for, but it's like the Lord just wants us in a place where we are willing to trust Him no matter what and know
Mhm.
that He's got us no matter what. And so I love that you came to that place. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And God's word, like you said, is a wonderful place to turn for encouragement. And we have Sarah and Hannah and Samson's mom. We have so many examples, Elizabeth in the New
Yes.
Testament. But we also have verses like in Psalms where we see the barren women and God gives them, a family and a home. And I think it's ultimately a picture of God's character that He understands the sorrow of loss and brokenheartedness. And though oftentimes He did fill their arms with children, eventually He will bring life out of nothingness in eternity, even if we don't
Yeah,
see it this side of heaven. And that's a really beautiful thing about God's character.
that's incredible. It is such a
Mhm.
encouraging. It's just been so encouraging what you've been sharing, and I know that people listening will, I'm praying that they will find comfort in that and knowing
Yes.
that, they can turn to the Lord and that He will give them that comfort, that He does care. I know sometimes it feels like when you're going through a tough season that nobody cares and nobody sees me, and like you were talking about with overlooked, and but God always sees us and He
Mhm.
cares and He doesn't turn us away when we come to Him.
That's right.
So thank you so
That's
much
right.
for sharing.
Mhm.
And so your daughter is 10, and you said you have two other children. How old are
Yes.
they?
I have another daughter who is 8, and she just turned 8 this week, and
Yay.
a son who is 5.
All right.
Yes.
You're in the throes of it.
I am, and I homeschool them, so I'm
That's
never
amazing.
not with them, which is a blessing, but sometimes it's hard.
Yes. I
Mhm.
I admire you so much. That's awesome. I'm so glad you can do that. What a
Yeah,
blessing to
only
be
by the
able to.
grace of God, but yes, thank you.
Yes. Well, before we wrap up, I like to ask people what their favorite mom hack or piece of advice is. So if you have anything you'd like to share, we would love to hear it.
Sure. Okay, can I give you a silly hack and then, like, a more serious, like, piece of advice?
Of
Can I do both?
course. That'd be
Okay,
great.
I'll start with the more serious. One thing I've learned, I think maybe it's through homeschooling, but I think that it absolutely applies whether you homeschool or not, just in motherhood in general. Um, Trust the process. My oldest daughter is 10, and I have been so much harder on her. Our first ones are the guinea pigs, I guess. And but as I've seen her grow, I'm always shocked at the way she's grown and the way God has grown her that I haven't done it. And so when I say trust the process, I really mean pray for your children and entrust their growth to the Lord, and it
Hmm,
will happen. Um,
that's good.
yeah. And then my silly hack is if your kids are home on break or if you homeschool like me, get yourself one of those little bento box things on Amazon and fill them up a snack box at the beginning of the day and tell them these are their snacks for the day, and then it will help with your grocery bill because they will have to manage their snacks and maybe not eat you out of house and home. And so we do snack boxes every day, and they look forward to what's going to be in there, and then they have to when it's done. So that's very
That is
helpful.
such a good idea. I wish I would have talked to you like maybe 5, 10 years ago. Can
Right.
you still do that for 15-year-old boys?
Would have several snack boxes, I'm sure.
It has to be a really big snack
A
box,
really big
right?
snack box,
That
yes.
is such a great tip. I love that because we used to have to do things like that in the summer with them because they
Yeah.
would just want to plow through everything, and I work from home, so I had times, and I would have like one of this and one of that, and that was it. You can have
Yes,
snack at
yeah.
this time and this time, and we eat breakfast and then lunch and then because it's
We have
crazy, isn't
to,
it?
or it'll all be gone in 2 days, yeah.
Yes, it
Mm.
will. That's such, have they enjoyed that? Do they do a good job
Yes,
with it?
they do. Sometimes they eat it all really fast and then they have to, and then I'll say, well, you can have a piece of fruit, or something, but something small. But yeah, it teaches some management as well. So maybe there's a bigger lesson in the snack
I
boxes than
think
just that.
so. I think that's genius. I love
Yeah.
that tip. So I hope some of our listeners will take that and run with it.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Whitney. It has been such an encouragement to hear your story. And like I said, I will post your website and your social media links in the description. And with that, we will say thank you so much and have a great day, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.